Welcome back to another episode of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I'm Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and with me today, as always, the Wrecking Crew. And I put them on the top part of the screen so you can see their beautiful faces and they could stare at you. Dr. Eric Tomlinson and Dr. Lisa Hong are here. And we are back with the archetypal symbols and fairy tales, Mary Louise von Franz's The Hero's Journey. So today we are gonna go through a Nordic fairy tale, The Three Dogs. And without further ado, Dr. Eric?
You bet. And this is about hostile trolls with dangerous, helpful animals and a wise soul guide as a third figure.
So just a tidbit, we have a troll in Seattle that lives under a bridge. It's a massive construction, and they usually stick gum on it. I don't know why, but they stick gum on the troll. Anyway, so if you're in Seattle, come up to Fremont and check out the local troll who lives under the bridge. Okay, Dr. Eric, go for it.
Once upon a time, there was a king who went forth into the world and fetched back a beautiful queen. After each of their three daughters were born, a strange-looking old woman appeared and prophesied that the mountain troll will come and fetch them if they were ever to play in the open before their 15th year. Thereupon, the king gave strict orders to keep his daughters beneath the roof of the castle. The princesses grew up to become the most beautiful maidens. Then war broke and the king had to leave. One day, the princess looked out the window at the garden and felt a great desire to play with the lovely flowers. They begged and begged their guards to let them go until they got their way. No sooner were the maidens beneath the open sky than a cloud came down and bore them off. All attempts to find them were fruitless. The grieving king sent out a commandment that whoever liberated his daughters should have one of them as a wife and half the kingdom in addition. Among many others, two boastful princes set out to search for the princesses. Far, far out in the wild wood, there lived a poor widow with only one son who drove his mother's pigs to pasture every day. As he crossed the fields, he whittled himself a flute and amused himself playing it. And he played so sweetly that he warmed the cockles of the hearts of all those who heard him. One day, an old man came along with a beard so long and so broad that it hung far below his girdle, accompanied by a large, powerful dog. He noticed that the fellow would like to have the dog and said, "That's why I came. I want to exchange my dog for one of your pigs." The lad agreed to the deal, and as the old man said goodbye, he added that the dog was not like other dogs. His name is Take Hold, and whatever you tell him to take hold of, he will seize, even though it were the grimmest of trolls. Thereupon they parted, and the youth thought that the fortune had indeed favored him. When the boy went home and introduced his new dog to his mother, she became exceedingly angry. The youth told her to calm herself, but all in vain. The longer he persisted, the more furious she became. Then, since he did not know what else to do, he called out to his dog, "Take hold." At once the dog ran up, seized the old mother, and held her so tightly that she could not move. But otherwise, he did her no harm. And now she had to promise her son to make the best of the matter, and then they were friends once again. The next day, when the lad played the flute again in the forest, the dog danced so well that it was like a miracle. Again, the old man with the gray beard came, this time with another dog, and again the boy traded him for a pig. "You have reason to be well satisfied with your purchase, for this dog is not like the other dogs. His name is Tear. And if you give him something to tear, he'll tear it to pieces, even though it were the grimmest of trolls." At home, his old mother was no less angry than she had been before. But this time she did not venture to beat her son because she was afraid of the great dogs. Yet, as is usual, when women have scolded long enough, they stop of their own accord, and that is what happened in this case. The youth and the mother made peace with each other, although the mother thought to herself that the damage done could not well be repaired. On the third day in the woods, both dogs danced wonderfully, and again the gray-bearded man came with an even bigger dog. The boy traded his last pig, and the old man explained that the dog's name is Hark, and his hearing was so keen that he heard everything that happened, though it happened many miles away. He could even hear the grass and trees grow. The lad was delighted. Back home, his mother acquiesced to his desire to see the world, and the next day he took leave with his 3 dogs. He came to the heart of a somber forest. There he met the gray-bearded man again and greeted him as grandfather. The old man advised him, keep right on going until you come to the royal castle, and there your fortune will take a turn. And with that, they parted. The youth followed the old man's advice and for a time wandered on straight ahead. When he came to a tavern, he played his flute and let his dogs dance, and was never at a lack of bed and board and whatever else he might want. Finally, he reached the town where the king had issued his proclamation. The lad went to the castle and had his dogs dance in front of the king, who became happy for the first time in 7 years since the disappearance of his princesses. When the boy said what he wanted most was to search for the king's daughters, the king grew gloomy, saying it was of no use, but if the boy was successful at delivering one of his daughters, he would not break his word. So the lad took leave and passed through many broad kingdoms. One day, Hark reported that the king's daughter was spinning in a high mountain and that the troll was not at home. When they got close to the mountain, Hark said, there is no time to lose. The troll is only 10 miles away, and I can already hear the golden horseshoes of his steed ringing on the stones. The youth now ordered his dogs to break down the door into the mountain, and they did. As he stepped into the mountain, he saw a lovely maiden sitting in the mountain hall, winding a gold thread on a golden spindle. The youth went up and greeted the lovely girl. Then the king's daughter was so much surprised and said, who are you that dare to venture into the giant's hall? During all the 7 long years I have been sitting here in the mountain, I have never seen a human being. And she added, for heaven's sake, hasten away before the troll returns home, or else your life will be forfeit. But the youth was unafraid and said that he would await the giant's return without fear. When the giant arrived in a terrible fury, the boy had his dogs tear him to pieces.
In the same way, he also freed the second king's daughter. Then he sought out the third. He found her sitting in the mountain hall weaving a web of gold. This maiden was lovely beyond all measure, with a loveliness exceeding all youth had ever thought to find on earth. He went up and greeted the lovely maiden. The king's daughter was much surprised and said, who are you that dare to venture into the giant's hall? During all the 7 long years I have been sitting here in the mountain, I have never yet seen a human being. And she added, for heaven's sake, hasten away before the troll comes, or else your life will be forfeit. But the youth was full of confidence and said he would gladly venture his life for the king's lovely daughter. The third troll had, however, already heard of the fate of his brothers and thought it advisable to fall back upon cunning and treachery, for he dared not venture into an open battle. For that reason, he made many fine speeches and was very friendly and smooth with the youth. Then he told the king's daughter to prepare a meal in order to show the guest his hospitality. Since this troll knew so well how to talk, the youth allowed himself to be beguiled by his smooth words and forgot to be on his guard. He sat down to the table with the giant, but the king's daughter wept secretly, and the dogs were very restless, though no one paid them any attention. When the boy became thirsty, the giant replied, on the mountaintop is a spring in which bubbles the clearest wine, but I have no one to fetch it. The youth answered, if that be all that is lacking, one of my dogs can go up. Then the giant laughed in his false heart, for nothing suited him better than to have a youth send away his dogs. The youth ordered, "Take hold," to go to the spring, and the giant handed him a great tankard. The dog went, yet it was easy to see that he did not go willingly. And the time passed, and he did not return. After a while, the giant said, "I wonder why your dog stays so long. Perhaps you would let another of your dogs go and help him, for the way is long and the tankard is heavy." The youth did not suspect any trickery and agreed. He told Tear to go and seek why Take Hold had not yet come. The dog wagged his tail and did not want to leave his master, but the youth did not notice and drove him off himself. Then the giant laughed heartily and the king's daughter wept, yet the youth paid no attention. He was merry and at his ease, played with the sword and dreamt of no danger. Again, his dog did not return, and he told his third dog to hurry to the spring, but Hark did not want to go, and instead crept whining to his master's feet. Then the youth grew angry and drove him off by force. And when the dog reached the top of the mountain, it shared the fate of the others. A high wall rose round about him, and all three dogs were imprisoned by the giant's magic power. Now that all three dogs were gone, the giant stood up and suddenly looked altogether different. He took down a long sword from the wall and said, "Now I will do what my brothers did not do, and you must die at once, for you are in my power." Then the youth was frightened, and he regretted that he had allowed his dogs to leave him. He said, "I do not ask for my life, since in any event the time will come when I must die. But I would like to repeat the Lord's Prayer and play a psalm in my flute, for such is the custom in my country." The giant granted his prayer, but said that he would not wait long. So the youth kneeled and began to play his flute until it sounded over the hill and dale. At that very moment, the magic wall was broken and the dogs were freed. They came rushing on like the storm wind. The youth at once rose and said, "Take hold, seize him, tear, and Hark, tear him into 1,000 pieces." And the dogs flung themselves on the giant and tore him to pieces. Then the youth took all the treasures, including the princess, hitched the giant's horses to a gilded wagon, and drove off as fast as he could. When the king's daughters met again, there was great joy, and all thanked the youth for delivering them from the power of the mountain trolls. The youth fell in love with the youngest princess, and they promised to be true to each other. So the king's daughters passed on their way with music and merriment of every kind, and the youth served them with all honor and courtesy due maidens of gentle birth. And while they were underway, the princesses toyed with the youth's hair, and they tied their golden rings in his locks for remembrance. On the way, they met the two wanderers. The youth stopped his wagon and asked them who they were and whence they came. The strangers asked that they were two princes, and had gone forth to search for 3 maidens in the mountain. But fortune had not favored them, and now they had to return home. When the youth heard this, he felt sorry for the 2 wanderers and asked whether they would like to ride with him in his handsome wagon. The princes thanked him for his offer, and they drove on together. But out of envy, the 2 princes attacked the youth and strangled him. The princes threatened the princesses with death if they did not keep quiet. When they arrived at the king's castle, he welcomed them with joy and great festivities. In the meantime, the poor youth lay as if dead in a gorge in the forest. Yet he was not dead, and his faithful dogs lay about him, kept him warm, licked his wounds, not stopping until their master came back to life again. When he was once more well and strong, he set out after many difficulties, he came to the royal castle in which the princesses dwelt. When he came to the great hall, the whole court was full of joy and merriment, and there was a sound of dancing and string music. That surprised him greatly, and he asked what it all meant. The serving man answered, "You must have come from far away, since you do not know that the king has regained his daughters who were in the power of the mountain trolls. Today is the oldest princess's wedding day, but the youngest daughter does not want the husband and weeps the lifelong day, although no one knows why." Then the youth felt happy once more, for he knew that she loved him and had kept faith with him. The youth went to the keeper of the door and bade him tell the king that the guest had arrived who would add to the merriment of the wedding festivities by showing his dogs. This was to the king's liking, and he ordered that the stranger receive the best possible treatment. When the youth stepped into the marriage hall, the whole wedding company were astounded by his skill and his manly bearing, and all agreed that so handsome a youth was rarely seen. When the king's 3 daughters recognized him, they jumped up from their table and flung themselves on his neck. The princes then thought it best to make themselves scarce and left. The king's daughters told all how the youth had freed them, and about the rest of their adventures. To show all that their story was true, they found their rings among his locks. Now, when the king heard of the trickery and treachery of the 2 strange princes, he grew very angry and had them driven ignominiously forth from the castle. But he received the brave youth with great honor, and he had deserved, and he was married to the king's youngest daughter that same day. After the king's death, the youth was made king of all the land, and the gallant king he was. And there he lives with his beautiful queen and is reigning happily to this very day. And that is all I have to do with it.
It's a good story.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So what a great story. So in our story, the mother in the story wants to keep the boy a child. She wants to keep him from becoming more conscious of the world and interacting with the world by understanding the unconscious. She wants to keep him undifferentiated. And when we say undifferentiated, is usually you live within the womb of the unconscious, where you're fed and clothed and taken care of, and you're kept in the warmth of the unconscious. So for instance, if you are in the military, that's like the great mother, because you're clothed, you're kept, you're protected within the unconscious. You're told what to do when they need you to do things. But otherwise, you are cocooned. Your medical care, your physical care, all of it is contained in the same place. When you're a child, elementary school, home, these are all containers, right? So, so in these containers, we start to look for differentiation. That's why we go to school. We start to seek differentiation. We start to seek it out. So this kid, his school was the forest. And so that's where he sought differentiation. That's where he learned from the animals. He learned about the world. He learned about the dangers of the world. He learned about dangerous trolls. So there's a magical figure in the forest, and the magical figures brings him a protective animal, a dog. And each dog has a particular skill. One has hearing. One can tear you to pieces, and one can hold you and freeze you, and you're unable to move. So he gets these 3 magical animals that are gonna protect him, but he has to fight the mother. So every time he brings an animal home, she reacts very violently for the child who wants to break away and wants to face the world. So he ends up in the first confrontation, he has the dog hold her tight, not hurt her, but hold her tight, because she beat him. And the second one, he does not, she doesn't dare because the dog is dangerous and he might tear her apart. But she's also angry with the child at this point. She's dismayed. The child's grown up and she doesn't like the way he grew up. So she's going to tell him she's dissatisfied with his choices. But this is a very old story, though. This is always parents and children. Children wake up and become conscious and want to hit the road somewhere. They want to do something different. They want to take a different adventure. They want to take a different course. You always have the kids who stay at home and kind of do what the parents want them to do, but you always have the rebels. And the rebels make this place a much more lively place to live in. There's a series on Netflix about the treatment of mental health issues with psychedelics. And it's quite fascinating. The first episode is on LSD. The second episode is on psilocybin's mushrooms. But in it, it's about all the people who dared to think differently, who wanted to explore the mind, not wanted to shut it down. In this story, what we see is an awakening of this child. This child awakens through the powers of the magical forest. So this is a Nordic story, and they are forest people. They basically, it's covered by forest and mountains. So this is where this child lives. And in the mountains, the mythology goes that there are trolls that live in the caves. And the trolls can be, in Nordic mythology, can be human-like, or they could be very distorted and grotesque and not very intelligent, or they could be very devious and strong and powerful, depending on which of the stories is told. So what do we think of the story so far, Dr. Eric?
I love the dogs. How can you not? And I had a dog when I was growing up, the first 15 years of my life. And he was kind of like this dog. I mean, he was there for me, protected me, saved my life twice. And there's nothing like the bond, animalistically wise, there's nothing like the bond that you can have, that humans have with a dog. And in this era and in this location, dogs were operational. They were working. They were either protecting, they were used with livestock. They also pulled people on, on small sleds, and they also tracked and hunted. So they're very wise. They're guides in some ways. And I loved seeing, because sometimes dogs can be portrayed. It's real easy in fairy tales for dogs to be evil or devilish. It's really nice to see them in a completely different light here. That's one thing that struck me.
Dr. Lisa, what are your thoughts about the story?
I like the note that you had introduced, that there is in this young boy a willingness to change. a willingness to explore, a willingness to learn new things, to seek something outside of his given womb, and extend beyond that. This, I'm excited. I'm curious to see where we're going to go with this conversation.
Well, so the next part is interesting. So he finds out a story about a king. So he has 3 dogs, right? So the
Right.
number 3 is important in the story because he finds out that there's a king who has 3 daughters, and those 3 daughters have been taken, which is the classic story of saving the princess from the beast. In this case, the trolls. In other cases that we've read, dragons, witches, prisons, magical prisons. So this is another form. There's a maiden, she's in distress, and he goes to. So this child who wakes up with the power of these magical dogs starts to have ambition in the world, starts to want to move from home, set out on his own. So the gray-bearded man who comes to him in the forest, who gave him the dogs, is the magician in the story. And the story goes, the next day when the lad played the flute again in the forest, the dog danced so well that it was like a miracle. Again, the old man with the gray beard came, this time with another dog. And again, the boy traded him for a pig. You have reason to be well satisfied with your purchase, for this dog is not like other dogs. His name is Tear. So he gives him a dog, but he also gives him a power. Each dog gives him a new power. The power of physical strength and the power of super hearing. So each dog gives him a power. So he even could hear the grass and the trees grow. This is the 3rd dog, Hark. The lad was delighted. Back home, his mother acquiesced to his desire to see the world. And the next day, he took leave with his 3 dogs. So his companions, right? He came to the heart of a somber forest. There he met the gray-bearded man again and greeted him as grandfather. The old man advised him to keep right on going till you come to a royal castle. So he tells him a story. There your fortune will take a turn. And with that, they parted. So the man, the old man, the grandfather, the magician disappears, the wizard. The youth followed the old man's advice and for a time wandered on straight ahead. Always thinking to yourself, why am I following this fool's advice? How many times have we done that? Somebody tells us to do something, we go do it, and we're like, why are we following this person's advice? And it turns out to be good advice. When he came to the tavern, he played his flute and lets his dog dance, and was never at a lack for bed and board, whatever else he might want. So he doesn't have any money, but because of his magical flute that keeps bringing him these helpers, these magical helpers who are the 3 dogs, it brings him the wizard who tells him a story. Finally, he reached a town where the king had issued his proclamation. And this is where our hero sets out on his journey, right? So the first part of the journey is the awakening. The hero awakens that he has to take a journey. He didn't know he had to take a journey. He awakens to the journey. The second part is the proclamation, which basically his journey begins. The lad went to the castle and he had his dogs dance in front of the king, who became happy for the first time in 7 years. Since the disappearance of the princesses, when the boy said what he wanted most was to search for the king's daughters, the king grew gloomy, saying it was no use, but if the boy was successful at delivering one of his daughters, he would not break his word. So the lad took leave and passed through many broad kingdoms. One day, Hark reported the king's daughter was spinning in a high mountain, that the troll was not at home. So he found the first princess. And Hark is the one that finds his first princess. And so his journey takes him from the king castle, and he's offered not to go. He's basically told, this is a fool's errand and you're wasting your time, or you're going to get killed. He decides, no, I'm going to venture out. I'm going to take. So he takes the journey. Now he has to face the danger. Danger is the troll, right? He has to face the obstacle. He has to face he has to face his nemesis. He has to face that which he fears most. And so troll stories were told to kids to scare them from going to places that could be dangerous, side of mountains, for instance, where they could get very slippery and the kids could fall, especially if you grow up around those areas. So how do you keep people from doing things? You make up people who scare them. You make up, there's a Bigfoot, there are trolls, there are giant spiders, whatever it is that the folklore of the day would make you believe. There were probably hermits who lived in the caves in the mountains, who probably had a lot of animal skins on them and looked pretty scary. Maybe they were called trolls. We don't know, but in the story, the troll has the king's daughter. So he comes into the giant hall and he sees her, and she's surprised by him, and she says, "Who are you that dare to venture into the giant's hall? During all the 7 long years I have been sitting here in the mountain, I have never yet seen a human being," she added. So deep within the unconscious, he goes to seek the treasure. The treasure is the anima. The anima basically tells him, are you stupid? What's wrong with you, kid? Why are you here? This is very dangerous. Do you know what you're doing? Right? And so he replies, for heaven's sake, hasten away before the troll returns home, she goes on, or else your life will be forfeited. But the youth was unafraid. He's one of us. And said that he would await the giant's return without fear. When the giant arrived in the terrible fury, the boy had his dogs tear him to pieces. Okay? So, what are we thinking so far?
Well, I like in the beginning, I like the fact that even though he came from a poor environment, I don't know where the father is. Certainly wasn't there guiding him wherever he was. And he did, I think, 2 things that stood out when you want to explore and find out who you are and evolve as a person. He first thing he did is he made something. He wasn't just going to sit back and let it come to him. He made something, and he made something pretty cool, pretty unique, a flute. And then he turned around and I think instinctively realized that, it's okay to not have to figure it out all myself. It's okay to accept help. And that's when the gray bearded man showed up and started exchanging dogs for pigs. I mean, this is a great beginning of anyone starting out on a journey. They do work themselves and they get help from other people. What two greater things can one do? So that impressed me right there.
Well, what's interesting is that when you trade the pigs for the dogs, you're trading satisfaction for now, food for now, substance for now, and for something later, because the dog represents part of the hunt, or part of the adventure, or part of the path to seek out, right? Also, Hades, there were three dogs. There was a three-headed dog that guarded the gateway to Hades.
Cerebrus.
These dogs represent a similar aspect, because what they do is they go deep within the unconscious, and they keep the monster from escaping. They tear it apart. So what do they do to the giant? They tear the giant apart. They keep the giant from escaping from the great castle, because it's a magical castle. It's basically a prison. That's where the princesses are held. In the same way, he also freed the second king's daughter. Then he sought out the third. He found her sitting in the mountain hall, weaving a web of gold. This maiden was lovely beyond all measure, with loveliness exceeding all the youth had ever thought to find on earth. He went up and greeted the lovely maiden. The king's daughter was much surprised and said, he was smitten, right? Who are you that dare venture into the giant's halls? You're going to get us all killed, kid. Get out of here. During all the 7 long years I've been sitting here, she says, in the mountain, I've never yet seen a human being. And she added, for heaven's sake, hasten away before the troll comes, or else your life will be forfeit. But the youth was full of confidence and said he would gladly venture his life for the king's lovely daughter. The third troll had, however, already heard of the fate of his brothers, and thought it advisable to fall back upon cunning and treachery, for he dared not. Cunning and treachery, right? They live in the mountains, they're deceitful, they're cunning, they're treacherous, they're kidnappers. So, for the reason he made many fine speeches and was friendly and smooth with the youth, then he told the king's daughter, the third troll had, however, already heard of the fate of his brothers and thought it advisable to fall back upon the cunning and treachery, for he dared not venture into an open battle. For that reason, he made many fine speeches and was very friendly and smooth with the youth. Then he told the king's daughter to prepare a meal in order to show the guest his hospitality. So he is seducing him. Since the troll knew so well how to talk, the youth allowed himself to be beguiled by his smooth words and forgot to be on his guard. He sat down to the table with the giant, but the king's daughter wept secretly, and the dogs were very restless, though no one paid them any attention. Right? So this is when you're caught by the sociopath. In this case, by the darkness that's undifferentiated. And within the troll has the ability to tap into your sociopath, your need for validation, your need for self-advancement, your need for grandiosity, your need to be told how great you are. And this is the downfall, right? You start to believe the fantasy, the projection, and then you lose touch with the reality. And that's what happens to him. You know, he's already freed 2 princesses. He's killed a couple of giant trolls. He's like, hot crap, you know. This guy is scared of me. He's not going to do anything stupid. So the boy does the stupid thing. And this is part of like becoming aware, becoming awake, that not to believe everything that is presented to you. Don't take for everything that is said for face value. Stare
Stay
deeply
vigilant.
into it.
Yeah, staying vigilant, to don't be complacent, even though this new environment feels familiar, even though you've gone deeper and you're doing the work. Don't be complacent, and be alert and aware of your circumstances where you are, and stay vigilant. Not to say that you're washing out for things, it's just being honest with where you are, and not to be conflated in any way, or to making any assumptions of how things may be arriving.
Well, the danger always, right, is complacency. The danger is that I've already achieved, I've already made it, the journey is over. And it's always when we think the journey has ended, and we have taken a shortcut because the journey has been hard and I really don't want to finish this. This is a drag. So if there is a peaceful way to end this and I could just walk out of here with the other princess, I'd be happy to do it. Yet the world doesn't work that way, right? You have to pay the piper, you have to pay the ferryman, you have to pay your dues. There's 1,001 ways to say it, about how we have to be able to work through the most troubling aspects of our own humanity. And part of that is the sociopath within, you know. As much as the shadow is displaced, there's a sociopathic aspect to it that's very, very dangerous, because it's very, very sly. It's very adaptive if you think about it. So early on in our evolution, you survived longer if you didn't trust anything. And therefore you disconnected yourself from everything. Over time, that was unnecessary. As your numbers grew and you felt more confident, you could let go of that piece. The problem is any piece that we develop psychically, any part of us that we develop stays with us. And so if you're walking through a library, you're basically looking at all the different aspects of human psychology and evolution. You're looking at very, very particular aspects of how we've evolved over time and how we've adapted, and how this lizard brain has cataloged, categorized, and kept on reference all these different aspects. And that's why they're so accessible when somebody else activates them. When somebody else smooths you over, when somebody else invites you into the lair, you know.
Can you repeat that
Welcome
last
to
part
this.
again? The smooth talker is accessing your weaknesses more easily.
The smooth talker is the primal hunter. The
Mhm.
smooth talker is the primal alpha. It is the one that's going to stab you faster than as soon as you fall into the idea that it's okay to rest. And what happens to the boy
And Lisa,
is
Dr. Lisa, they can mimic. They're very good at mimicking sentimental oriented emotions, the softer emotions.
Mhm.
And that's what fools someone who's not prepared to deal with that kind of personality type and traits.
so they play the top tune, but what they're activating is a much more subtle, much more dangerous tune underneath that you connect to. You start to connect to the feeling of unbridled rage, and the feeling of unbridled rage is feeling like um, you're not just enraged, but you're free to be enraged. So they tune into that wave. They tune into the wave that why not you? Why these other people? They tune into the wave of your paranoia, your doubt, your feelings of insecurity. They tune in, right? So this creature that we must have um, integrated, digested once upon a time, this creature taught us how to do that, how to be relentless, ruthless,
Mm.
disconnected, not connected to the rest of humanity.
It can be very, very addictive because it gives almost instant power to someone rather than the power that one acquires by working through suffering and developing skills and hard work. It's much more instantaneously satisfying.
Because it rewards the brain right away. Oh, not only have you survived, but you did it with a shortcut, right? This is why they warn against shortcuts. Don't take the shortcuts, take the long way. You're not going to learn if you take the shortcut. The brain is wired for things to be simple, efficient, and quick. Anything that's complicated, long, or that requires something different. So the quicker you can make it, the more digestible you can make it, the easier, softer, chewier you can make it, the tastier it is. And somebody who's smooth, who's a sociopath, always makes you feel like you're kind of uneasy, but you're kind of really relaxed because they don't give a flying crap about anything. And so at first you find that, what's the word for it? You become envious of it. But that's when you are in danger the most, is when you start to crave the power that they are that is coming through their pores.
Yeah, secretly having power over others is an aphrodisiac to many people. I mean, it's really, there's a proverb that says, especially when you're doing it without them knowing about it, which sociopaths are good at doing, trickery. And there's a proverb that says food eaten in secret is delicious.
Mm.
when no one knows what you're doing and you're getting satisfied, that's delicious from a
Yeah.
power
So
point of view. It's
that,
very
so
delicious.
that proverb comes from a sociopath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or someone trying to tell us about this, a sociopath.
Yeah, that's what sociopathic thinking is.
Yeah.
That's what the danger is. And that's why you can fall into it so easily. That's why you're so gullible to it, because they don't come after you with things that you don't have. They come after you for things that you secretly want, but society say you can't have. They tell you, no, you could have that. So back to our story. Um, on the mountaintop is a spring in which the bubbles the clearest wine, but I have no one to fetch it. The youth answered, if that be all that is lacking, one of my dogs can go up. Then the giant laughed in his false heart, for nothing suited him better than to have the youth send away his dogs. The youth ordered, take hold, to go to the spring, and the giant handed him a great tankard. The dog went, yet it was so easy to see that he did not go willingly, and the time passed and passed, and he did not return. After a while, the giant said, I wonder why your dog stays away so long. Perhaps you would let another of your dogs go and help him, for the way is long and the tankard is heavy. The youth did not suspect any trickery and agreed. He told Terror to go and to see why Take Hold had not yet come. The dog wagged his tail, did not want to leave his master, but the youth did not notice and drove him off himself. Then the giant laughed heartily, and the king's daughter wept, yet the youth paid no attention. He was merry, at his ease, played with his sword, dreamt of no danger. Dreamt of no danger is the most dangerous time. Again, his dog did not return. He told his third dog to hurry to the spring, but Hark did not want to go, and instead crept whining to his master's feet. And then the youth grew angry and drove him off by force. And when the dog reached the top of the mountain, he shared the fate of the others. A high wall round about him, and all three dogs were imprisoned by the giant's magic power. Now that all three dogs were gone, the giant stood up and suddenly looked altogether different. He took down a long sword from the wall and said, now I will do what my brothers did not do. You must die at once, for you are in my power. That's when you're caught. Then the youth was frightened and he regretted that he allowed his dogs to leave him. He said, I don't ask for my life, since in any event, the time will come when I must die. But I would like to repeat the Lord's Prayer and play a psalm on my flute, for such is the custom in my country. The giant granted his prayer, but said that he would not wait long. So the youth kneeled and began to play the flute until it sounded over the hill and the dale. And the very moment the magic wall was broken and the dogs were free, they came rushing on like the storm wind. And the youth at once rose and said, take hold, seize him, tear, Hark, tear him into 1,000 pieces. And the dogs flung themselves on the giant and tore him into pieces. And then the youth took all the treasure, including the princesses, and hitched the giant horses to the gilded wagon and drove off as fast as he could. And now we want to say, and he lived happily ever after. But again, this kid learns the hard way. He does not learn the easy way. So the princesses who come, who tell him that they had a hard time and that they went to free the princesses and they couldn't free them, and if they could hitch a ride with him. Again, he learned nothing from the giant. He didn't learn the lesson he was supposed to learn with the giant. which was be careful and understand what the words are and why they're saying what they're saying. He did not learn. So he ended up repeating the mistakes. He lets them in and they almost kill him.
And doesn't that happen a lot in people's lives? I mean, yes, he was learning. Yes, he was being manipulated by a sociopath to the point where he forgets about continuing to need the three helpers that have helped him so much. And then he's starting to pick up on what he's dealing with here, and then out manipulates the sociopath in order to get his three helpers back.
Mm.
And that was a good growth to learn, but he was still in survival mode, so he didn't extend. And then he goes, he's probably going, that was close, not recognizing that there was some more it's just like it right around the corner.
Yeah.
So he learned it in that one context, but he didn't learn to apply it forward.
So when you're traumatized, you disassociate the trauma. So he disassociates what happened to him. So it happens again. He's not noticing it. That's happening again. Because he disassociated the trauma. So until they basically almost kill him, he does not recognize what is happening. And this is what happens with trauma, right? And this is what happens when we're violated. They don't, so what's going on here is very, very bloody. This is a very bloody story, by the way. They tear these giants into pieces. I don't know if you've seen dogs attacking human beings. It's pretty bad. So it's pretty gory. It's pretty bloody what happens between him and the giants. There's a lot of trauma. Plus, he goes deep within the unconscious. So he's emerging from the unconscious again. He's emerging from the unconscious. The first encounter with the unconscious was the mother. He had to break away. The second time he had to confront the unconscious was the king, the father, who said, there's no use in it. Don't do it. He had to face it again. Because he's like, you're safe, you're here. Why are you risking yourself with trolls? They're gone. I've given up. He has to face it, so he goes. Faces fear. The third time he faces the trolls. Or that particular troll. He kills the other two. The fourth confrontation is with the princess. Two princes who come, who hitch a ride. He does not see threat in them.
That was a good sequence of trials. I'm glad you stated it that way.
So the story, Dr. Eric, is of becoming more and more conscious, right? Emerging into consciousness. As we emerge into consciousness, our field of consciousness expands.
Yeah.
We no longer see the two objects in front of us. We start to see the field of consciousness around us. It opens up. The more conscious we are, the more we're able to deal with our own darkness.
Yeah, we either deal with it or give into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're overcome by it, absolutely.
Yeah.
which what this young man does is basically he proves it over and over again that you have to, that there's no way out without confrontation. You have to confront that which is the most distasteful to you,
Yes.
to be able to overcome it and move forward in the world. You have to face the greatest danger. You have to face your worst fear, the trolls. You have to believe in the magical, which is the old man he calls grandfather, the magician. You have to trust in other type of beings, the animals. And you have to rely on your wits over and over again. The consciousness is a very difficult task. So basically the story leads us from elementary school all the way through a graduate program and the Marines. So that's what this kid does basically. He graduates, every step he takes, every lesson he learns, every path he crosses, every danger he overcomes, he builds up confidence, he builds up a sense of being in this world, and that's stronger, a stronger ego. So his confrontation with the unconscious phases him, and the anima in the unconscious pleads with him not to do what he was going to do. And he does not listen to him. Right? So the anima is the creative, instinctual side, the side that helps us find meaning in the world, helps us become creative, helps us believe in our intuition, helps us move forward in the world. He does not listen. He has, he's afraid of the mother. So he doesn't listen to the princesses. He doesn't listen to the anima. The anima is there and she's warning him that whatever he's doing is stupid, but he does not listen because she openly weeps at the table when he sends the dog away. Okay, why is she crying? Somebody died? Well, you dumbass. I mean, you're the one she's crying about. Right? But he's not paying attention. I like this story. I like this story. It's stories of awakening. I mean, we've had several of them, but it's a good story.
Yeah, I like all the different, I really like all the steps of awakening to show that it's a journey. It's not a singular event.
Yeah.
It takes time and it takes years to have that, to open up that much of your unconscious. And I think for me personally, the most important thing you said today was you have to face who you really are, deepest and deep and down into who and what you are. You have to face that, or you'll never get past it.
Yeah, I think Ray and underneath the island, she faces herself. Luke faces himself in the cave. He thinks he sees Darth Vader and he fights him, and suddenly when the mask falls off, he sees his face. Ray and underneath the island, she sees several different versions of herself deep within the echo. There are several ones who are staring back at her, calling her.
Is that a movie or a TV show?
It's
The
part of
Underneath the
Star
Island.
Wars. This is all part of Star Wars. This is, Star Wars episode 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I think, or 9. Anyway, I sat the other day and watched 6 films of Star Wars. The prequels I couldn't watch, but I watched the other 6 that were made, and it's a fascinating journey of awakenings. And every time they think they've kind of crossed the finish line, they realize they have only just begun, that it's actually not the finish line. They're not even close. And that the danger grows. Yeah, the more they are able to move through, the more the danger grows. Yeah, they have the series on Disney. They have a new series called Obi-Wan now, where it traces Obi-Wan's after his exile, after the fall of the Republic. But it's interesting. Anyway, he's confronted with Darth Vader on several different occasions, and they have to fight it out. But there's always, when you fight your shadow, it's always a stalemate. You don't win, and the shadow doesn't lose. With that, we will be back next week for another episode of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and with me as always, Dr. Lisa Hong and Dr. Eric Tomlinson, and we are not afraid.
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid, and we're the Institute for Conflict, and we will see you next week.